Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of the 24th of November. The only apology I have is the Deputy Mayor for lateness. Are there any other apologies? No, so I'll move that apologies be accepted. I have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Naylor. We'll just wait for technology to be. Mr. Armstrong's. He hasn't got a controller, so. We didn't want you to vote, Steve, so. Okay, all systems are go. Are you ready? Right, you may vote. Hang on, something's happening here. Yeah, that's right. It was just got stuck. Okay, and that's carried unanimously. Right, I'll just go on to health and safety, and this meeting is being recorded and will be live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. And we have level 2 restrictions in place, which require you to scan in and wear your masks if you're moving off around the room from your table. Health and safety, there's no members of the public here, so please take note of the screen and you all know the health and safety rules. Right, that's all for that. So are there any notifications of additional items? I'm not aware of anything. No. Item number 3 is declaration of interest, and I've had a note from Councillor Bowen. You've got an interest in item 8.
Declare a conflict of interest for item 8. Thank you,
Okay,
Madam Chair.
so that's noted. And we now move on to public comment, and we have Mark Tregelwith online, so we'll just get you up, Mark, and get you sorted, and then I'll give you the okay to start speaking. And Mark's from the Cafe Esplanade. Are we ready? So, Mark, when you're ready, you may start. You have 3 minutes. Can you hear us, Mark? Right. Houston, we have a little problem. So, Mark, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Okay, so you have 3 minutes, so you may start. Thank you.
Okay, when I purchased Cafe Esplanade more than 6 years ago, I accepted the lease I was offered and took at face value assurances that there would be more rights of renewal past June 2023. Since then, Cafe Esplanade has achieved many of the goals I set Surviving winters where our staff numbers are frequently larger than our customer numbers, and carving out a solid reputation as a popular destination for great coffee and one of Manawatu's largest selections of specialty foods. While we are proud of what we've achieved and for the loyalty we've established with our customers, our biggest success to date is possibly surviving a global pandemic, 2 lockdowns, and adapting to stringent and ever-changing COVID-19 restrictions. Ahead of us, uncertainty continues with rapidly increasing supply of food costs, a nationwide shortage of hospitality staff, and a pandemic that shows no signs of going away. In difficult times, we have looked for certainty from you, our landlord, by asking for 2 more rights of renewal past June 2023. This isn't an unusual request. In contrast, it is normal business practice when you're investing in the future of your business. This year, we have worked to support council staff as they have conducted a hospitality survey. We've encouraged our visitors to the Esplanade to participate and attempted to amend what appears to be the contentious clause in our lease. In the wake of the survey, we were advised that survey participants from the cafe were largely senior citizens and that this indicated there was a need for food options elsewhere for younger generations. We see every day that our customer base is diverse and includes all ages and ethnicities, not primarily one demographic. We are privileged to know and understand the generations of local people who in unprecedented times continue to show us their support. While the hospitality report in front of you states Cafe Esplanade has reluctant acceptance of change, I would like to clarify that we believe that change is inevitable. And following our presentation to you earlier this year, we have attempted to discuss our lease and amend the sole food and beverage clause in it, and requested the opportunity to meet with the proposed miniature golf development to explore if and how both entities might be able to work together. To date, we have had 1 meeting with our property officer weeks after our presentation to you. At this meeting, we were asked what would be safe distances if other vendors were to be introduced in the Esplanade. We provided feedback immediately and were advised nothing would progress until after the hospitality survey was completed. There have been no further negotiations. We are a good tenant with a bright future, thanks to the hard work and vision of our team. We are supportive of the evolution of Victoria Esplanade, and while the report in front of you today asks for your vote on council staff's hospitality options, we ask for your support and a vote for future rights of renewal for Cafe Esplanade. We believe that change is inevitable and are supportive if change is managed carefully, receives strong governance, and has marketing investment to attract more visitors to the Esplanade to ensure that all food and beverage providers are able to survive.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Your 3 minutes is up. And I will just check with councillors if they have questions, and we have a question from Councillor Dennison.
Kia ora, thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Dennison here, Mark. Just when you were saying that you had some openness or flexibility around the rights renewal around other vendors, am I understanding? And there's one around the miniature golf having the ability to sell non-cafe food and drink, but then it goes on about mobile vendors. Can I understand your comfort around both? One, the mini golf, and then the extension beyond that to other mobile vendors.
Right, so we're accepting that, the miniature golf, there is a place for that for a food kiosk. We've been told that it would be largely convenience foods, things that wouldn't be non-cafe items. So we're actually happy to support them. We know how hard it is in hospitality, and we would be very happy to meet with them to see if there is common ground that we can support each other. As far as mobile vendors, if there is an appetite within council for mobile vendors, the only thing that we've requested is that they be located at the Fitzherbert Avenue car park end of the Esplanade. That way there is no risk of people venturing out, as is currently happening, where mobile vendors come in without licences and park in all areas of the Esplanade. So really all we want is some sort of business plan around it. We would be quite concerned if people, were allowed into the main Esplanade and then parked close by the cafe and tried to compete with what we're doing. But other than that, we're very happy to meet with the miniature golf developers to discuss how we could work together. So we've tried to do that since our presentation to you earlier this year, we've been told that the miniature golf would not be prepared to meet with us until after the food survey. There's been no other contact apart from that, and we've met once with our property officer.
Thank you. Just a second question. You mentioned again COVID, which you did earlier this year as well, getting through last year, and of course we've just had a recent lockdown. Can I understand the impact that's had on your business and how that again might be a threat with having other operators nearby?
Right, okay, it's probably the hardest thing that I think we've ever gone through. You know, the business was closed completely. We've had to rebuild twice in the last 2 years to try and gain customer trust. It means that we now have to observe social distancing. A third of our furniture is stacked and unable to be used so that we can have distancing. It means that simple things like our ice cream area, we're not able to open it because we can't guarantee that people would social distance. So for us, there's a lot of things that we're having to follow, and we're doing it gladly to support the government's actions. It's going to increase in the next few weeks, potentially with compulsory vaccination passports, and even potentially with staff having to be double vaccinated, so having to potentially find more staff. So there's lots of implications for us moving forward.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Mark, for your presentation and being available for questions. Just wanted to follow up on an answer you gave to Councillor Dennison and then ask another question as well. But in your response to Councillor Dennison, you sort of talked about any mobile vendors being positioned in such a way that they didn't create any competition. So I just wanted to understand, sort of is your view such that the cafe business should face no competition at all?
No, it wouldn't eliminate competition for the cafe. At the moment, we have competition with the Elm Cafe, also with the BP service station at the new bridge. There is also ice cream and coffee providers, so there is competition within the Esplanade area. What I'm saying is that there is also, at the moment, there has to be, we're a large key tenant in the Esplanade. I would hope that there is moves that we don't have people located adjacent to where we are, so that it's directly across the road, or that they're parking in front of the building and competing and trying undermining our coffee costs or food costs. Obviously, as the lessee for the cafe, we have significant costs in rent, staffing. We have conditions in our lease that we have to be open, 7 days a week. So there is a lot of conditions on us that wouldn't necessarily apply to mobile vendors. So I'm asking that there would be governance around that. Yep. Also, the other thing that we do struggle with in the Esplanade in weekends and public holidays is congestion, and the car park at the Esplanade Central entrance to the Adventure Playground is often filled to capacity with people parking on lawns, and having something there as well would just cause further congestion.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate that clarification around proximity. The other question that I had was really if we do go down a mobile vending sort of complementary path, would your business be in a position to potentially provide some of your services off of a mobile platform?
I have actually raised that with council staff and said that if we were to provide a mobile option, would that be something they'd be interested in? And I've been told that their preference would be to go to open market, and we would be welcome to put a submission in.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. I have no more people in the queue, so just checking. No, so thank you. I will now move that the public comment be received. Have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Harpeta. There are no comments, so we will move to vote. And that is carried unanimously. We'll now move on to item number 5, which is confirmation of the minutes. And we'll just note that Councillor Dingwall was an apology on council business that was picked up earlier. Not on council business, sorry. Was any, I'm happy to move the minutes. Anybody second it? Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Are there any comments? So we'll move to vote. And that is carried 14 votes for with 2 abstentions. I propose just to move the agenda around. I'll move the airport one till after the Esplanade, just to make it easier for Mark, who's online, so that we continue this. So, and Kathy's here, so we'll now move to item number 7, which is on page 21. And it's the Victoria Esplanade Hospitality Review. So Kathy, and you have Aaron with you. So ready when you are.
Thank you. Councillors, I'll take that the report has been read and we are here to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. And first up in the queue is Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy and Aaron. So my question is about, follows on from the third recommendation about the mobile vendors. So I'm aware at the moment that there is a mobile vendor that comes into the playground and sells lollies and ice creams on a regular basis. And there seems to be no enforcement of the fact that he doesn't have a licence. So if we were to vote through this recommendation about the limited number of mobile vendors, how would the enforcement of the terms and conditions for a mobile vendor happen? In other words, given that we've got ad hoc mobile vendors already in the Esplanade, how are we going to make sure that if we agree to mobile vendors that we aren't going to get breaches of hours, position, number of people, etc.?
So there's 2 ways in which a mobile vendor is enforced. The first is that they have the appropriate health certificate. The person who's operating does have that certification, and they do have a licence to be able to operate along the river park. The issue is that from time to time that particular vendor comes into the playground, has been told before not to be in the playground, but quite often is in the playground when we don't have staff on duty. I think as we go forward and we have a presence permanently in the playground in the form of the mini golf, we will probably need to look at our staffing through that area, and we have been discussing with the staff, particularly as the river park opens up, potentially having staff working the weekends. That would be somewhat easier than to enforce at that end of the Esplanade. Going forward, I think it would be fair to say that we don't tend to have issues with our kiosk operators in other parts of the city, that they generally understand that it's a privilege to be able to operate on a council reserve. Our proposal would be that when we get to the point that lease negotiations have been concluded, as Mark has mentioned, that we would go to the market. And part of that going to the market would provide the opportunity for that vendor that's currently going into the playground to be part of that open market process and to obtain a licence. We have declined to issue him a licence in the past, which is why he tends to go into the playground.
Okay, so given that my understanding of your report is that the thinking about the mobile vendors is that they would be much more operating when the cafe was closed, then they would be mostly operating at evenings or possibly other times when we wouldn't necessarily have staff on duty to enforce them, wouldn't they?
Yes, that would be correct, but we do have a security service that locks our gates. Consideration would have to be given to whether the putting food in the Esplanade, if it increased the amount of activity in the playground, then we would probably have to look at the staffing in that area. Okay. So it is unknown, when you do a survey, it's unknown when people identify a need, what the size of that need is going to be. So in the paper you'll notice that we have proposed that using some of our existing vendors, we do a trial in the summer of allowing them to operate in the evenings to test that before we actually issue some licences. So that information will help inform our decisions around staffing, around enforcement and around the amount of licence that we would ultimately issue.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy and Aaron. Because it's a reserve, I find it quite strange that we're having this big discussion in front of a full council on a cafe lease in our Esplanade. Is it because it's a reserve? Because we don't do anything with Vortier Park, we don't do anything with Arena, and Arena's a much bigger lease.
With commercial leases, the delegation is with the property manager to issue those commercial leases without coming in front of council. This matter was put in front of council because it was considered that it was of public interest. That is the only reason it came up initially to council, and also the fact that we, as officers, believe there needed to be an overall hospitality review, and issuing a commercial lease may or may not be in conflict with the results of that hospitality review. Ordinarily, no, a commercial lease would not come up in front of council.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And just on Hiara-Kotahi Bridge side, there's a number of walk-up vendors there. They have mobile licences or hawkers licences?
Yes, there's two licences that we have issued, and they have specified trading days, and we have ensured that those two vendors are complementary to each other, often offer different fare, and that we monitor those, and that they, from time to time, we have discussions with them if we believe that they're not operating in line with their agreement.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Kathy, for this the most detailed report. Probably somebody might have earned a graduate diploma on this research if they were at Massey. Anyway, I have three different questions. On page 24, it says that the open market concept or option was not supported by the existing lease owner. Were all other options supported by him, other than this open market thing?
So we met with the operator once we had completed the survey and went through the survey results, and his feedback is at 8.2 in the report on page 35, his specific feedback, and he was opposed to option 5, but the other information he gave us indicated that he was supportive of some of the other options with controls. So we would take it, but he did not specifically say that, other than his opposition to option 5, he did not specifically say that he supported one of the other options.
On page 23 and many other places, there is a talk of additional revenue if we allow the additional vendors, but it says either $500 every 6 months or $27 an hour to cover the cost of the staff. So is it really an additional revenue? Will we be getting any additional money other than paying the staff for additional work?
Sorry, just a clarification, it's $27 a day, not per hour. The staff administer a number of kiosk licences at the moment. Though that licence fee is set through council's fees and charges, so it is recorded in council's balance sheet as revenue. The costs of the staff administering the scheme is time, but those staff would be paid to be operating in their normal roles. This is not a particular role for a person. So this is administration office within this building, not administration down at the Esplanade.
Thank you. And third one, I'm sorry if I have missed it in the report. Is there any record or count of the total visitors in a certain period at the Esplanade? How big is the market? I mean,
That we don't know. We don't know how big the market is, because just because people say in a survey that I currently bring my food, and then on another question they say this is where food should be available, does not mean that they will stop bringing food and then start buying from those vendors. And when we do calculations of how many people visit the Esplanade, we have to do that based on our annual survey, which we're doing at the moment, which is basically we intercept people and ask them how many times a year they visit, and then we have to, and Aaron does the calculations, then we have to extrapolate that data and say, from that sample, therefore on average there's this many visits. With so many different entrance points, particularly off the river, it's really difficult for us to accurately measure how many people come and go from the Esplanade.
thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy. As a part of the strategic review, was there any consideration of any river-facing hospitality options in the future?
No, there wasn't.
As a part of the Esplanade master plan, is there any sort of expectations or understanding of what the increase in visitors will be in the coming years?
No, we're not able to anticipate changes in people's behaviour as a result of developments.
Okay. And just looking at the third recommendation, which would restrict further opportunities in the future, do you perceive that that will be limiting in any way in terms of what the future could look like for the Esplanade?
I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty answering the question. Could you rephrase that for me?
Yep, okay. So the limited number of mobile vendors, so that recommendation 3 would mean that there would be a limited number of mobile vendors and a restriction on trading hours and products for sale. And so I guess what I'm asking is, I understand from this paper that there's been a strategic review, which I would have expected would include looking at the future of what the Esplanade may look like. I guess my question is, would recommendation 3 be a limiting factor to what opportunities could be allowed for in terms of hospitality in the Esplanade area going forward?
Thank you for clarifying your question. No, it wouldn't. What recommendation 3 by putting the word limited in there gives the councillors and the community assurance that it's not going to be a free-for-all, that under the delegations that you've given to the Chief Executive, we will exercise due diligence in considering the types of food and the vendors to make sure that we both match need, but also that we don't undermine the integrity or the ambience of the Esplanade, and also cognizant of the fact we've got a tenant in one of our premises.
Okay. Sorry, can I just perhaps ask one more question? Just returning to my first question around any consideration of river-facing hospitality. In the river pathway work, has there been any consideration of that sort of opportunity anywhere along the river?
There has been consideration, but that is not currently listed as a program within the current long-term plan funding.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy, just to follow on, the licences we give to the mobile vendors, are they annual or biannual, or what length of time do we?
We issue them on a 6-monthly basis.
So at any time we change our strategy, then we don't have to renew any of those licences?
That's correct, and it also gives us the opportunity to review the type of food, the hours of operations, the location, every 6 months with the vendor, or otherwise we don't issue a licence. The vendors don't have a right to a licence, so we can issue as many or as little as we choose at any time.
Thank you. Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, Kathy and Aaron, for the report. Just a couple of questions. I anticipate with number 3 that you'd be looking to do either a business or an operation plan to basically put number 3 into place, just to show how it would actually work for the operators in terms of the licensee of the Esplanade, but also the operators. Is that what you anticipate?
Hadn't given this consideration to the need for a business or an operational plan. We would look at the hours and the need, and some of that information we would not have until we have done a trial over the summer months with the evening trading, as we've mentioned in the report, to be able to indicate what conditions we might put on those traders. We have a number of mobile traders at the moment. We normally, when we enter into an agreement with a mobile trader, have the ability to give them a period to trial it and come back to us with to discuss any negotiations around whether it's working for them or not. It's not in our interest to put somebody in a park that's not successful. So generally, most people who come forward to us operate at other sites already, and they're looking to extend the sites they operate from.
Sure. Have you tried to facilitate any communication between the Esplanade Cafe and the Lions Group?
I'll need to get Aaron to answer that question. I haven't myself.
Nothing direct, Councillor. They're both members of the Esplanade user group and both invited along to those. They've both been made aware of opportunities to talk to each other, but we haven't arranged a meeting directly ourselves between all 3 parties. Okay.
And my third question's relating to the comments that Mark made about his term of his lease and the continuity for his business. I'm not trying to get into any private matter, but just wanting to know, going forward, for his assurance for his business, how is that handled going forward for him, for his assurity for his business?
That would be handled in a separate report to the committee. This report just relates to the hospitality. We have mentioned the lease in this report so that you've got some context around the potential relationship with the hospitality review and the lease, but that's not a matter that we would discuss at this meeting.
Thank you for those comments, Kathy.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy. Just a couple of questions. One just around the third recommendation there, around the products for sale aspect. I guess it seems like a pretty sort of narrow lens to be starting to come into if we're going to tell people they can sell tacos but not burritos. And I just want to know why we're sort of talking about things at that sort of limitation.
Thank you for the question. The reason is that part of the hospitality review was that people asked for options. So it's important that when we're considering licences that we don't have every day of the week the same types of things, because that then wouldn't be addressing those needs that have been raised through the hospitality review. So the limitation on products for sale is as much about making sure that if, for example, you want to go down to the park on a Friday evening and you know there's always a fish and chip vendor, that might be the day you choose compared to a Saturday night when you know there's a different type of vendor. So it's about being able to offer that variety to the patrons of the Esplanade.
Thank you. Sticking with recommendation 3 and sort of having listened to, Mark's sort of concerns around, sort of competition right on his doorstep, as it were, and just thinking about the ongoing development and at times very high use of the Esplanade. Did we consider an approach where we might say you've got a zone of a certain number, 100 of meters, where there won't be competition around the cafe, but other than that, mobile licenses could be granted, say, around the scenic railway or, say, around the playground or other parts, rather than just going to the Fitzherbert end?
Based on the information that was provided from people in the survey, the preference from the community was for the same end of the Esplanade that the cafe operator has mentioned. So that's the first comment I'd make. The mobile licences we sell deliberately have a clause within them that prevents a person from trading within 100 metres of another business. So that's to protect our ratepayers in an ordinary situation. Within the Esplanade, that would protect our tenant. So that's a current thing that we have within our licences. So yes, consideration, coming back to your questions, consideration was given in option 5. That could be zones or in general, but that wasn't our recommended option because of the feedback from the community.
So can I just square that with page 29 then, the chart that's there? I mean, maybe I'm misinterpreting what's presented there, but I kind of see that chart as saying that, well, firstly, the people that eat at the cafe really like to eat at the cafe and don't want to eat anywhere else. But also that people that don't eat at the cafe would like to eat anywhere but the cafe.
Sorry, the question is?
Trying to square that information with the view that's being presented to us in recommendation 3, that there is only demand for Fitzherbert.
Thank you, I understand your question now. That is not what we're saying here. What we're saying here is our recommendation is that you set up food vendors in the playground end, because that is the end that has been most commonly mentioned in terms of the question results, but also in terms of the free text answers which are attached to the report as the place that people wanted food to be available. There is nothing preventing council at another stage coming back and opening up another area. However, that would be risky at the moment, given that we don't know the impact on the cafe, and we also don't know whether, as I've said earlier, that preference for where food should be sold will turn into actual demand. And what we don't want to do is put a whole lot of vendors in there, and people have raised this concern throughout the Esplanade, creating, obviously, people have mentioned rubbish, but putting those people in and none of them are successful. So it's not in our interest to have a lot of vendors and none of them be successful.
Thank you.
No, I've got 4 people in the queue.
Back to you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and I'd like to get this done by 10 o'clock because we have got 2 meetings today. So please, I'm giving everybody a fair chance, but just Councillor Finlay.
Yep. There we go. A couple of 3 questions. You talked about the vendors at the new bridge, and you said they had continuity and they don't go against each other, so that's a good thing. So I would presume that after that statement, that any vendors in the Esplanade would also have continuity with each other?
Sorry, what do you mean by continuity?
Well, you said that they will work together and they didn't sell the same sort of things, and you know.
Oh, sorry. So you mean complementary?
Complementary, sorry. Yeah.
Complementary, absolutely. That we would give consideration to make sure that we met the needs identified in the report, which was, there's a variety of people that have participated in the survey with a variety of different views on different things that are available. So it's in our interest to make sure that what is sold is complementary, but also offers that variety.
So there wouldn't be 15 ice cream or coffee vendors?
No, that's not our intention. In fact, our intention is probably to start with there may be one mobile vendor, and it may be, a mobile vendor one evening, and the next evening it's a different mobile vendor operating from the same location.
That actually leads me into my next question. The Cafe Esplanade, part of their contract with us, it says that they have to be open 7 days a week and set times. So, and these vendors that would be going into the Esplanade won't have that on them, and they can pick and choose the cream when to turn up, and if it's a wet day not to turn up, etc.
We would specify the days in which they are able to operate, but no, ordinarily we wouldn't, with mobile vendors, require them to be there at that time. It's not in their interest not to turn up, however, because their patrons turn up and they expect them to be there. Okay. So our experience is that most of our mobile vendors are there when they say they're going to be.
Okay. How many vendors are we looking at? You say, you're very clear there's a limited amount, so are we looking at 5, 10, 15?
We anticipate that if you were to pass recommendation 1 and mini golf was also operating, that we'd be looking at 1 or 2.
1 or 2, okay. And the last question I've got is, when would we expect to see the lease on Cafe Esplanade come back to this council so it can be finalised?
At the first or second meeting of this committee in the new year.
Thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So looking at 6.4, it said that the type of food and drink and the hours of operation of the mobile vendors and the impact on the cafe would not be considered as part of the licensing process. So if we're looking at restrictions on food and drink types, how does that actually work in practice? You said that you'd be taking into consideration a number of factors, including the needs of our existing tenant, but what would the restrictions actually look like?
Our recommendations don't align with option 3. Our recommendations align with option 4 because that's operation of the mini golf and the vendors. And under option 4, we would be looking at the hours and the restrictions on food types.
Have you got another question, Councillor?
I might leave that one there. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in regards to what comes first, and I understand in your recommendations too that this is the negotiations with the cafe tenant, and you're saying that will come in the second meeting potentially in the new year, and then that 3 comes after when it says once the lease negotiations are concluded, so therefore we're not even considering the mobile vendors until after the second meeting of this meeting, of the finance meeting in the new year. Is that the progression I'm understanding clearly?
Yes, that is correct, Councillor. But what we are intending to do under the current provisions is to trial some mobile vendors over the summer period using some of our existing vendors.
Is it a follow-up question to that? Is it possible to do the trial over the summer and then come back and consider 3 at the same time as that lease comes back for finalisation of the cafe?
Yes, that is an option for Council.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Aaron and Kathy. I've got a couple of questions, and apologies if these were asked before I came in. They should hopefully be straightforward, though. Just following your response to Councillor Dennison around the trial, under the exclusivity clause we have with the cafe, can we go ahead with a trial?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. With the site specified in the licence given to vendors, is there the ability for that to be changed or reviewed? For example, if you were to grant 2 licences and one of them was parked near the miniature railway and one of them at the playground down the other end, is there the flexibility within our agreements or licences with vendors around the site to move that if it's not working, or is it, does that require a new contract?
No, we can do that, and we have done that on one occasion in Ashurst, where they trialled a site to see if it was going to be successful, and then they moved somewhere else upon our agreement. The only thing I would say with that is that we have to give consideration to the other activities going on in that area, and also access to car parking for people who might pull up in a vehicle, and in some cases power.
Sure. And then just my final question was the connection to, I guess, Hiara Kotahi, that entrance piece, the new connection we've just opened, was that open at the time of the survey?
It was incomplete at the time that we did the survey, but it was nearing completion.
So
Incomplete.
do you think that there could have been any impact in terms of activity at that end if the survey was, I'm not advocating for this, but to be done again because we've activated that end of the Esplanade in a different way?
No, I think that's unlikely because the fact that we've got two mobile vendors very close to that entrance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. So that's the final questions. Councillor Barrett, have you anything pressing? Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's the end of the questions. Thank you very much, Kathy and Aaron. We now go to the recommendations on page 21. Do we have a mover for recommendations?
Madam Chair, I'll move 1 and 2. If,
Councillor Dennison has moved 1 and 2, and Councillor Naylor has seconded. We'll now go to comment, and first up, Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to support the progress to at least that point. I think there's some goodwill, even from the response from the operator at the cafe, to have provision for the mini golf with the Lions Club. So I think I've got a high degree of comfort around partnering in that direction. As far as my principles, as far as making decisions around this, and it goes back to the March recommendations that we put through council, is that we're to negotiate with the Esplanade Cafe tenant to vary the terms and conditions with a view to extend the lease for a further 3 years, and that this is reported back to the Finance and Audit Committee. And so I feel like we haven't followed through on that, and I feel like under the challenges with COVID and let alone all the other aspects that businesses have to deal with, that we should give a primary commitment to negotiate terms that are agreeable for him for a further term. There's a number of investments they have to make, and I think it's only fair and under goodwill, I feel like we should be negotiating that first off. While I'm not opposed to having vendors, mobile vendors operating up at the Fitzherbert end and the Victoria Esplanade, I think that's a subsequent decision we can make, and we can make that in the new year after we've done the trials, after we've confirmed the terms of the negotiation with the cafe operator, and I just see it as simple as that. And so therefore, anything that extends beyond 1 and 2 in today's recommendations, I'll be voting against, but for 1 and 2, it has my full support. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm also happy to support those first 2 recommendations. I did have some reservations about the 3rd recommendation and wouldn't be wanting to support that at the moment. I guess my comments are, looking at this paper, 8 months ago, we waited for this to come back to us with a strategic review of the hospitality within the Esplanade area. I guess my expectations of what I was expecting to come back may have been, I was expecting something a little bit broader and a little bit more visionary than just limiting it to the focus of what happens currently, where people buy food from and when. I think when I think about the investment into the Esplanade in our master plan and the intersection that's happened and throughout that whole reserve, I think it's an absolute jewel for our city. And I also think, with the bridge, I think there's a lot of potential for there to be more activity that's river-facing in the future. And I would hate to tie ourselves up into knots with restricting opportunities because we're being too narrow in our focus. Looking at other cities, there's a number of other cities where I've been recently where the river and hospitality facing the river actually adds a huge, an added dimension that I think our city has a lot of opportunity for our river to be enhanced and opportunities around the river to be enhanced. And perhaps that's for another conversation, not for today, but I would be disappointed if we weren't thinking ahead enough and sort of added things that would be too restrictive in terms of the decisions that we're making here. I think absolutely we want to make sure that the businesses that do exist are viable, and I think that can happen through the second recommendation. And I think the added activity that's happening in the Esplanade, we need to think about that as opportunities of what that could look like in the future, and not just simply focus on what happens at the moment in terms of hospitality in the Esplanade, because I do think there's a huge opportunity for growth and development in that area.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When I look at the Esplanade and as one of the jewels of our city, and I've taken lots of people from overseas and from around different parts of New Zealand around the Esplanade and showing them, particularly in the Rose Garden, and the comment I get from so many people, isn't it great that you haven't commercialised the Esplanade? That they can go around the Rose Garden and they can go around the different parts of it without pie carts and bits and pieces trying to make money out of them. They love the Esplanade, they love it as it is. Now they do want a cup of coffee, well they can go to the Cafe Esplanade. And if you look at the survey, we talked about BP and the Elm, people go there as well. I would hate to see mobile vendors throughout the Esplanade. It would absolutely wreck it for the future of the city. Okay, maybe something in around the mini rail, maybe something over at the playground, but nothing more. I would like to see us look after our Esplanade and keep it as it is. I'm not in favour of seeing whole lots of food and coffee and ice cream vendors and bits and pieces throughout the Esplanade making money. I like to see it kept non-commercial. Thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When I look at all of these options, I'm thinking what's in it for the people of Palmerston North? And what are the risks here? And to me, I'm seeing a whole bunch of risks. It could have a damaging effect on the cafe. They were quite nice about it, but actually it could have a damaging effect on a cafe that's needed to survive its first 5 years, well now 6 years, of trading when most cafes actually fail. Survive 2 years of COVID and all of the drama that entails. Survive having very little trading in cold, wet, wintry days when no one wants to go to the park, and survive ever-increasing costs like food, particularly good, healthier food. I also think about the risks in terms of what we're actually offering people, particularly kids, who go to those parks. It's very easy to sell cheap, fast, unhealthy food to kids, particularly when you're marketing it to parents just trying to have a break in the park. What would the Lions sell? Pre-packaged chips, cookies, lollies, cans of fizz maybe? What would the vendors sell? Bottles of hot chips, hot dog on a stick? To me, that would ruin the play and connect with nature vibe that we actually have at the Esplanade. There are comments around restricting types of food, but logistically, I can't see how that would actually work. You would essentially be providing the same food as the Cafe Esplanade, at which point, why not go to the Cafe Esplanade? I also think about the waste. As much as I love food trucks and He Arakotahi Bridge, those bins around there are always full. Can you imagine the waste around the toddlers area? How are we going to keep on top of that? And it's not like we're actually restricting food from that space. Anyone can pack a picnic and bring it to the Esplanade. At least 35% of people in the survey already do. There are barbecues for people to cook their own food if they want to. Is there really a need to add more hospitality competition to this end of the park? Are there queues going out the door at the Esplanade Cafe that can't be met at the moment? And does this warrant extra focus? One of the benefits of Cafe Esplanade is that you can take your kids to the park without the pressure of needing to buy something. But if you decide that your budget and your family actually wants it, you can walk the 2 minutes to the Esplanade and buy something. You can go across the road to BP, you can go to the Elm, you can go, there are the food trucks by the bridge. It's not like Palmy has a lack of places to buy food to bring into the park. So I don't believe that we need to commercialise every last segment of our most loved public park. Let's say no to extra people trying to sell us stuff in the Esplanade. Let's support the one local cafe we already have in that space, and the cafe, which our survey says, is widely used by our community. Let's not risk losing that. So for me, I would say no to all of this pretty much and just go with status quo. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and really good to be able to join this conversation. I missed the March meeting and have found it interesting to see how things have evolved through that meeting and since. I'll probably disappoint some colleagues by saying that very much we need to be looking to provide options to our community, and I think there's clear evidence in the review that options would be valued. And furthermore, my view is that the sort of controls that the officers are talking about in recommendation 3 prevent the sort of calamities that others are concerned of. In particular, I think we need to have some consideration of the points actually raised in recommendation 3 in some way, because that is actually central. It's the central point that needs to be negotiated in the contract. So I find it quite remarkable that we're going to sort of just kick the can down the road when it's actually the one decision we need to make. And so I would indicate that I'm seeing motions across the table that suggest there may be moves afoot to address this, but I think officers brought us a holistic opportunity and decision to make, and we should be looking at it in the whole, and these 2 recommendations do not do that, so I would be reluctant to address these without considering the bigger picture, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I too missed the March meeting, but I still find it really strange that we're now into over an hour of discussing a lease, and yes, I get it, our crown and the jewel Botanical Gardens Park, but we don't discuss Arena, we don't discuss George Street, we don't discuss Fortier Park, we don't discuss a lot of other hospitality leases. So just my caution to my colleagues is let's be careful we don't politicise what is essentially really an operational type decision and taking advice. Officers have indicated that they want operators to succeed, including the cafe. And like Councillor Barrett, I'm not a fan of the protecting things or even the fun police that some other councillors want to promote. It's really around competition and variety of hospitality actually makes for a better offering for ratepayers and residents and visitors. The Esplanade is one of New Zealand's few 5-star public gardens, and as one councillor said, you can go down there and have a picnic, and done that many times myself. And I mean, the variety, you've got options. There already is options there. It was established in 1897. It was established for all people of Palmerster North and visitors to Palmerster North. But I think we should be taking the officers' advice on this. If you look at other cities, other great parks, botanical gardens around New Zealand, they have variety. Christchurch Botanical Gardens has several operators. Dunedin Botanical Gardens, Hamilton Gardens, just some examples. And they all have good quality options and variety. So I do think that we need to, I support 1 and 2, but I do, like Councillor Barrett, we need to come back to the first principles of what we're doing here. Are we going to protect a whole lot of people? Or are we, and if they're very good, they'll survive and do very well. You'll see there's something else coming back on the table after we vote on this. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to support the 2 recommendations on the screen, and I'll just signal and speak to it all together that I have moved the 3rd recommendation and the Mayor seconded it. I think it's really important that we actually are clear on what our next steps are, and I would like to give certainty to the current operator, the potentially future operator with the Lions, but also maybe some other mobile vendors out there who may be looking at what's to come in the coming months, especially heading into a new year. I think it's really important that we're really clear that there may be other opportunities to be considered, particularly when we've got groups like the Lions who will be doing their budgets and those kind of things. I think they need to be aware of what else might be coming. I think as well, I mean, when Councillor Naylor spoke, she said that we don't want to restrict opportunities, and that's why I've moved the 3rd recommendation. I actually think that it is really important that we give this opportunity, and I have a lot of confidence in our staff when negotiating these kind of contracts, because the reality is that the cafe that is there currently doesn't operate at all times while the park is open or used. And so actually, I trust their judgment around giving an opportunity that if somebody wants a coffee and the cafe is closed, then there is another local business who is able to provide that opportunity. I do think that we need to be just generally open-minded around this. And the reality is that you know, the comment put by Councillor Dingwell around why not go to the cafe, well, it's not always an option to go to the cafe. I think the main thing here is that this says once lease negotiations have concluded. So this is the step once we have got given some certainty to both the cafe and the Lions, and we'll be really clear around where the gap is in terms of servicing hours, location, whatever it is. So overall, I think, look, if whether it's the cafe, whether it's the Lions providing a kiosk, if nobody is there at that time filling a market request clearly from our survey, then there's no issue why a vendor can't provide that. And look, I love taking my kids there, but I also love hot chips, so I would be happy to see those there.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I will be supporting 1 and 2 and also 3. But before I make comments about those, I just want to compliment the officers on the first survey that has been presented to Council in the 5 years that I've been here that has a margin of error and a 95% confidence level. And that, if I have achieved nothing else on Council in 5 years, that has made my day. So thank you for that. But anyway, as regards the proposals, I think that this has been a very carefully done survey, that multiple options have been considered, and I'm happy with the recommendations that have come forward. I like the idea of a trial for the mobile vendors over summer, but I do think that we need to indicate at this stage that we're looking at having mobile vendors in the longer term, because otherwise, if you were a mobile vendor, why would you bother doing the trial if there was no prospect of having a lease in the longer term? I am a very frequent user of the Esplanade and also a frequent user of the cafe, and I have not yet got my gold card. However, there are times when I'm at the other end of the Esplanade, I'm in the playground with my grandkids, or I'm up at the railway, it would actually be really handy to have a mobile vendor in the vicinity. So that's even times when the cafe is open. And in those situations, my business isn't lost to the cafe because I don't have the time or the opportunity to go to the cafe at that moment anyway. So I think if we look at the report, we can see there's lots of requests for other opportunities for refreshments in different parts of the Esplanade. There's also the issue that's been raised about different times of the day, and certainly in the late summer afternoons and early evenings, it would be really nice to be able to get a drink or something to eat in the Esplanade. So I'm open to this. I think it's a good idea. I think the issues for the cafe are being carefully negotiated. And, you know, Mark himself said that change is inevitable, and I think he's accepted that there are going to be some changes. But I think with the very large number of people in the Esplanade, especially over the summer months, that there's not going to be a significant impact on the cafe in allowing these changes. So I would urge you to support this. I don't think we want to be overly prescriptive in what we allow. There's nothing really sacred about the Esplanade as opposed to any other place in the city that means that we can't have a mobile vendor in there. So I'm happy to support it. Thanks.
Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm happy to support all three. I think that competition is the right way to go. As an operator myself, I've got competitors all around me, and I think it is tough as a competitor to have them all around you, but it actually makes you work harder. I think what Kathy did say when she said a limited number, she was talking about 2 mobile vendors, not hundreds, so it's only 2. So I think we've got to be quite clear about that, and I think that actually does add that variety. I think if we could have something like an operating plan which adds the transparency and guidelines for everyone, it just opens that up so everybody knows what the playing field is, everybody knows what the gameplay is. So I think that would be really clear for everybody. So I'm really happy to support all 3 recommendations. Thank you very much for the report.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about the 3rd recommendation as...
Yes, you may ask.
Okay. I have a question about the very first line. It says, once the lease negotiations have concluded. So is there a timeline, or will it be concluded on the current tenant's terms or council's terms? I couldn't understand how we conclude these negotiations, on our terms or?
We're talking about the cafe lease.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll get an officer just to clarify that for Councillor Butt.
The intention is to come back to Council in February or March, Finance and Audit Committee, with concluded lease negotiations with them. Obviously that will be subject to approval as part of that process from Council, but the terms will at least be agreed in principle. And at that point, then recommendation 3 could occur.
Okay. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just a question on the recommendation 3. Listening to the discussion, I think the intention is for that to be enabling rather than limiting. And I'm just wondering if the mover and seconder would be open to deleting that last line, which is restricts to the Fitzherbert Avenue and Victoria Esplanade playground end.
It has already been deleted.
Oh,
that's not the...
So can we just clarify what the 3rd recommendation is that has been moved?
That was the original one.
I've moved what's on the screen.
Oh, sorry.
So is there a willingness for that to be adjusted? If not, I'm happy to move an amendment.
It is
I
adjusted.
have adjusted it.
The Fitzherbert Avenue is gone.
The recommendation on the screen is not the same recommendation as in the papers.
Okay.
There is limitations on locations which have been removed because staff can negotiate location themselves.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. I hadn't clicked.
Okay. Councillor Finlay.
I would be willing to support recommendation 3, but there's one little problem with it. When it says to me to a limited number of mobile vendors, what's a limited number? Is that 10? What is it? Limited number, you're talking to, but what is the limited number?
Well, yep, it's It's what it is, and we're not opening up to further questions.
Okay,
So you've
all right.
heard what the office
I'll
has
vote against
said.
it then.
Yep, that's fine. Councillor Bowen.
Madam Chair, speaking in support of all three, this seems eminently sensible, very practical, and I think the officers know what they're doing. So I think the report was excellent, it covered a lot of ground, and we should just get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, there's no one else in the queue, so Deputy Mayor, do you want to go back for item number 3? You moved it. So, okay, thank you. That was what I wanted to hear. So we are now going to vote. Oh, sorry, Councillor Dennison.
Just in my right of reply, I just wanted to say that I don't think not voting for 3 means that we don't consider it. I just think it's a pause and hold and wait for the trial and wait for the negotiations with the cafe tenant to conclude. Worst case scenario, if you play it out, if we don't get a signed negotiations with the cafe tenant because he's unhappy with the mobile vendors opening up, is it possible, I posed the question, and it's extreme, that we end up with mobile vendors up around the cafe, and the cafe's got no operator? Ponder that thought. It seems ridiculous, but it's a thought. And so therefore, the other point that I'm less comfortable on and would draw members' attention to it is actually where the recommendations from the officers did have a specific location at Fitzherbert Ave. This one does open it up, and I think that does pose the concerns for the cafe tenant operator that, again, that they're in near proximity to where he's based. So those are my concerns that I just wanted to reflect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, that wraps up the comments. So we will take 1 and 2 first together. That's what, do you want 1 and 2 broken up? Okay, right, so we will take number 1. Sorry, we just need to go back for... Okay, so we're voting on number 1. And that is carried 15 votes for with 2 abstentions. Oh, sorry, 2 against. Sorry, thank you, Councillor. We now will vote on number 2. And that is carried unanimously. And we now vote on number 3. And that is carried 13 votes for and 4 against. Right, so that wraps up item number 7. So you'll be pleased, Steve, that we're now on to item number 6, and that's on page 11, and that's the Palmerster North Airport Statement of Expectations. So we'll take that as fairly read, Steve, and open to questions, unless there's anything you'd like to add that's not on the papers.
Just a couple of very quick points. Obviously, it's less than 12 months ago that we approved the first one, and we've worked through that, and that was helpful for the airport company in preparing their statement for this current year. And the changes that we're proposing are relatively minor, but give us slightly stronger emphasis on the expectations we have of the company in relation to their connectivity with the freight hub, taking account of the uncertainties really in the COVID environment for their planning, and recognising that there is shareholder benefit for P&AL to be undertaking some of that major infrastructure work to do with the terminal and with the Ruapehu Business Park.
Okay. Thank you, Steve, and we're open for questions. So, Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Steve. It's a kind of comment or question.
No, it has to be a question.
It's a question kind of comment, anyway. Steve, it says that Council is committed to help airport to reduce the emissions by 30% by 2030. But it's a national goal, but the national goal has been revised just before the consent of parties to 50%. Are we happy with this 30%, or we should put 50% in there? It's on page 17. The environmental impacts.
Number 3, Steve.
Well, I'm not an expert in this area, but is this consistent with the Council's present goal or the national?
My understanding is it's not.
I'm not sure there's anybody in the room that knows it. Is a bit more of an expert on this than I am. Perhaps David might be able to.
David.
Our goal is a 30% reduction by 2031, so it's very close. I think it would be unreasonable to be asking the airport company to be doing anything further than what we've got in our goals. So I think aligning it to our goals would be, but 50% is well above our own goals that we've placed on ourselves as an organisation and a city.
Okay, thank you, David. Does that answer your question?
Then can we remove the national goal to meet the national goals?
So perhaps we would change it to Council's committed to meeting a goal of achieving a 30% reduction by 2031. Is that what would?
Yeah, that should be.
Okay, I think we don't need to do an amendment for that, I think.
No,
Yep, thank you. Any further questions, Councillor? Okay, Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. My question was about the same part, and it's been mostly addressed, but I'm just going to question the inclusion of the below 2005 levels, because it's not the 2005 levels that we're using as our baseline. So I wonder if that could be changed to also align with the council baseline year.
Are you comfortable with that, Steve?
If that's what needs changed to reflect that, yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
That's just an edit. I'm comfortable with that.
My other question is more of a broader question, I suppose, is I know that Steve has just briefly outlined the areas of change, but it's not very clear without searching out the previous SOE what the changes are. And I wondered if we could have a changes track document or something like that in future, or maybe one emailed out to us with where the changes are, because it's a bit hard to pick up subtle changes otherwise.
I initially have prepared one like that, but that's not what's been presented to you now, yes.
Okay, so could we perhaps just have it emailed to us, Steve?
If you'd like, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, Mr. Armstrong.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Steve. My question is really one around the process to get to this point with a statement of expectations. So what engagement has there been with the airport board? Were there any particular points of discussion or emphasis that they were putting forward? Just how has that played out? Any points of difference?
Yes, well, I guess what happened was we prepared the one last year that was adopted by the council, and that was sent to the board, who considered it as part of the development of their statement of intent for the current year. And they were broadly understanding of and happy with that for the current year. And when it came to this particular one, I engaged with their chief executive and asked whether there were particular aspects of the current year one that he would suggest that would be helpful for them in terms of change. and he came back with some minor wording changes that I've encapsulated in here, and we'd proposed one or two minor ones ourselves. We haven't engaged directly with the board, though I know that he will have spoken with his board about it.
Okay, thank you, thanks.
Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Steve. I suppose it's a question maybe for you to ask the board, and perhaps I could do that as well. But on page 17, 3.2, around the commercial entity, there's the naming of this Ruapahu Business Park, and I know that there has been some confusion in the marketplace, especially with the Kiwi Rail development and our Central New Zealand distribution hub. That is this another hub, another park? But actually, it does feed into the wider hub. But I wonder if they would consider possibly renaming or adjusting it slightly to reflect the aviation or the aeronautical side of what they're doing there. Maybe Ruapahu Aero Business Park.
Yes, Mr Mayor, that could become an issue we addressed outside of the statement specifically. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Are there any further questions? There are none, so thank you, Steve. You may step down. And we will move as amended. There's another item number 2, that the statement of expectations for Palmerster North Airport be adopted as amended, along with number 1 and 2. So I'm happy to move both of those. And Councillor Hapeta, your second. I'm comfortable with that to go forward. I don't think we need to go into a great comment, and we'll with the changes as we mentioned. There's nobody wishes to speak, so we're happy to vote. And that is carried unanimously. I'm now going to move to item number 11 to get this in before morning tea, because I want to get everything done by 12 so we can have lunch and be ready for... So we're now moving to page 105. So Councillor Barrett, you're on the spot. So Councillor Barrett, that's your recommendation. We're going to take it as read. Are there any questions to Councillor Barrett? Yes, but it's taken as read unless he really wants to speak to it.
I'm happy to take questions first,
Yes,
but I would
we'll
like the chance to comment before we vote.
We'll do questions first. Well, you have a mover and a seconder, so I can take questions first. So, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Councillor. Look, in your notice of motion, you say here, number 7, that the free fares would be funded by central government and effectively wouldn't impact on council finances and ultimately ratepayers. Do you genuinely think that would happen? Who's going to pay for it?
So I've not indicated no impact on ratepayers, because I do understand that ratepayers are a subset of taxpayers, and the intent is that taxpayers would pay, but it will not have an impact on the city council itself finances. But obviously nothing's free. It does need to be paid for. The campaign is proposing that it's paid centrally through, more than likely, government taxes.
Second question. Could I ask why they didn't approach the mayor or the CE or the officers and they went through the side door, this organisation?
I'm not sure that I would characterise it as a side door. I understand that all elected members, including mayors, were approached throughout the country, not just this particular council. So it's been a very widespread campaign to contact elected members, including mayors throughout the country.
I obviously was missed out, as was some other mayors of metropolitan cities, but
Question.
I'll leave it to comment. Thank you.
The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Just a question around the campaign. So obviously we're just putting our name to the campaign in support of calling on the government to fund this across the country. Do you have any idea of how many councils have currently moved a resolution to support this as well? I'm aware a lot of individual elected members have, but have you got any idea of what councils have thrown their weight behind this?
Thanks for the question. It's moving quite rapidly because they're trying to consolidate an initial indication of support around a draft submission to the emissions reduction plan and then have a wider campaign beyond that. So I don't have an up-to-date, but I know that in Wellington, you've got this Wellington City and Porirua City. Locally here, Horizons took a vote yesterday and chose to support it as well. So certainly there is good precedent for councils responding to support this campaign.
Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair, and yeah, thanks, Councillor Barrett. Look, my question is really just ongoing a little bit from what the Mayor was asking about, is that if this came to pass, do we actually have any understanding of the value of this if it was ever implemented?
It's an interesting question. In that value is quite a broad term. I think it would have exceptional value in terms of the social good, the good to the transport system, et cetera, et cetera. And so will there be a cost associated with achieving that value? No doubt. I don't have a specific estimate, and I haven't seen any modeling of it. I think, in fact, as a city, we could be leaning into this by sharing some of what we've seen in terms of what free fares meant and continue to mean for students in our city and the sort of uptick that we actually saw in utilization of the bus service. So yes, there will be some cost, but I think that cost will be far outweighed by the value.
Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Councillor Barrett. My question's for the Chief Finance Officer. Do you anticipate any cost for the City Council in this motion? Have you done any modelling at all from this motion and had any thoughts about it?
No.
No cost.
No, I haven't done any work regarding this, and I suggest Councillor Barrett might be better placed to answer that than me.
Yes.
Sorry, I can't answer. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Harpeter, if you go to number 7, I'm just saying, that's fine, I'm just saying, if you go to 7, it's answered. Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
I've got a comment. Are we in comment? Are we still in question?
No, we're in questions.
Okay. If I were, all right, I'll save it. I'll save it.
Okay. So, all the questions have been answered. So, Councillor Barrett, you want to move, and Councillor Dingwall is a seconder, so you can move, you can speak to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just briefly, I actually see this as quite straightforward and would hope that colleagues do as well, and I've made some effort in the notice of motion to lay out the rationale, but basically these 3 priority groups are the best place to start investing in better transport access, and it's because they represent a large portion of the public transport users who rely on those services the most, but they're also the groups that are the most likely to be least able to afford it, and that's why it makes every sense to start here. Furthermore, it brings government investment into the community, which is something that we're often seeking, and frankly, it would improve a lot of people's lives in this city if this happened, and I would hope that you can see your way clear to be supporting this campaign. We should be backing it, and we should be backing it now, and it would be fantastic if Budget 22 actually showed a response to this. So would urge you to support in that view. Madam Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I will be supporting this, and I just wanted to, first of all, address the issue of cost, because that when we were all emailed, although I see that the Mayor was not emailed, when we were all emailed on 5th of November, I think it was, I did reply and ask if they had a costing, and the answer I got was that they had not got a costing, that they had asked Greater Wellington Regional Council for a costing and they hadn't been able to get one, but that they were requesting that government do a costing. So the idea of this certainly is that it be centrally funded, not that it be funded from rates, but I think as a council that already has a partial sort of free fares scheme, we're in a good position to be able to talk about how it works for us in the city. And I think that there's no risk for us in agreeing to support this, because it's more really an extension of something that we're already doing as a city. I do see it as something that would enable us to achieve our carbon goals sooner if we could get more people on public transport. And we know that the cost of a journey on a bus is an inhibiting factor for people, particularly those on a low income. So I think that if we could get a good support for this nationwide, that government might be persuaded to introduce this type of scheme as part of the emissions reduction plan nationwide. And so I'm happy to give it my support, and I think it would achieve quite a lot of the goals that we already have as a city in terms of persuading people to use public transport, in terms of increasing equity and reduction in carbon emissions. So I'd ask for your support.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yep, delighted actually to be supporting this. Colleagues will recall from our long-term plan discussions that this concept is something we've flirted with through those conversations, and the barrier has always been the difficulty in establishing cost and understandable hesitation about putting that onto ratepayers if we don't know the scale of the thing that we're getting into. So this proposal to take it to central government actually provides a way for us to continue with, as Councillor Johnson has said, our already very successful free fares scheme working with our tertiary institutions, and extend it into the areas of greatest need, which are those that are included in the resolution in front of us. In principle, I'm very in favour of us looking at free public transport. I think there is a growing body of evidence internationally that this is a direction that certainly metropolitan areas are looking to take. Cars impose a lot of costs on society that drivers don't pay for all of. And I think we know that everyone benefits when people can travel around freely. So that might be an end goal that we never quite get to, of totally free public transport, but certainly making public transport free for the people who need it most. And central government leading on that seems to be a win-win situation, and I'm happy to support it.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was quite happy to support this one because getting people on buses will cut down carbon emissions. We all know that it's easier to make a fleet of buses electric than it is to convince everyone in Palmerster North to get an electric car. That's just, that, you know, it's logical. The problem with buses is that it's a catch-22. When you don't have many people using the service, you end up with less options, less routes, less frequency, less desirable bus service, and then less patronage. If we can flip that, then we could have more people on buses, which makes it easier to create more routes and more frequency, and that will make it easier to catch a bus, and then more people will use the service. The cycle continues. So more people on public transport would mean less traffic on our roads, and we all like that, particularly around the school drop-off and pick-up times. If you drive anywhere near any of the schools in Palmy, I'm thinking particularly Girls High at the moment, that's, you know, Palmerster North Intermediate Normal School, traffic is madness in that area. So being able to get children onto buses without it causing massive financial difficulty for families would be a good thing. A frequent and convenient bus service supports the most vulnerable people in our community to get from A to B. And I'm also thinking particularly about people with disabilities and people on low incomes, which this would actually help to do. So we know that public transport is good for our community, and we know that it's good for our city, and we know that we have great public transport in most developed countries. So what's holding us back from getting people on buses? And the simple answer is money. Quite frankly, councils around the country have been struggling to pay for decent bus services, and that actually encourage patronage. So our incentives are all wrong, and councils have the tough job of trying to charge for parking so that individuals can rent spaces in town to use their private vehicles instead of incentivising public transport. So it's all connected. And this here is our chance to actually make a difference to this wider system and start changing behaviour in a positive way. It's time that we advocated for our community and joined the hundreds of voices already on this petition by asking central government to subsidise these bus fares for the people who really need it. Because if it's successful, it could save us and the country huge amounts of money, and it would make a massive difference to the environment. And this is a decision that has everything to gain and really nothing to lose. So I encourage you all to support it.
Councillor Rutherford. Sorry, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to support the notice of motion from Councillor Barrett. Thank you for bringing this forward to us for consideration. I mean, we already do this in part, as has been explained by other elected members, and putting our name behind this campaign, I guess for me, I liken it to some of the submissions we make to government where we put our voice behind a particular position on something that's being discussed at a national level. I do think that if we are focusing on these key groups, I like the comments that Councillor Bowen made around free public transport, full stop, but as a starting point, you know, these are identified groups which may be more vulnerable in our community, and so any barriers that we can remove and prioritise as a council, I think supports many of our city goals. So I'm absolutely happy to support this. It's no cost to us, but we know that we carry some significant weight as a city putting our name on a campaign like this, and I think that that would be very valuable for the campaign, so happy to support.
Thank you. Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, acknowledge the mover and seconder, and I understand their political backing on this, but I can't support this. I absolutely get members' wants and needs to improve public transport and the usage of it. But I mean, they haven't. I'm not a fan of activist type campaigns, and members know that. They haven't come through the right channel, I believe. They haven't written to the Mayor. They haven't written to the organisation. The CFO doesn't know what the financial ramifications are. Happy to have another look at this if there was some understanding of what this meant for the city. It's great that they've gone to the people who actually run the bus services like Horizons, and that's great that Horizons are backing it. They're the correct people to be backing this. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that, but I'd be happy to support it if it would have come through the proper channels, but it hasn't.
Councillor Denison. Okay.
I've just looked up the members of the free fares, and there is a mix of political, young Green and the young Labour, but there's a mix of different church and union. It's quite diverse background, but did note that the regional council was one of the councils that was supporting, along with Dunedin, Kapiti Coast and Porirua City. So just for information.
Okay, thank you. before I hand it back to Councillor Barrett, oh, sorry, did I take you? Oh, sorry, Councillor Naylor. Sorry, I threw you out by mistake.
Very briefly, I think this is an absolutely fantastic initiative. To me, it's a no-brainer. I struggle to understand why anyone would oppose it. And just really want to acknowledge Hannah Pilkington-Ching and the other young people who have really brought this to our attention. I'm sure it's of no deliberate intention on their part to miss anyone, but rather to raise an awareness. And the one aspect that I think is pivotal to the potential success of this is having the free fares for people under 25. Obviously, the other aspects address equity and access issues, but I think for public transport, one of the key issues is forming habits. And if those habits can be formed for young people under 25, then they're used to using public transport, then those habits will continue on as they grow older. So I think this is absolutely a sensible idea and very happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor, and sorry about that. I'd just like to make a comment. I'm comfortable to support this. There is no financial obligation to this council at this point, so we're not moving any financial costs to council. This came up 5 years ago in the Social Wellbeing Forum as one of the top barriers for lost socioeconomic areas, for barriers to getting to work, to all sorts of constraints for people not to be able to live their lives the way they want to because they can't afford cars, so the only option they've got is buses, which cost money. So I don't have a problem with this, and it will go through. Okay, we haven't seen financials or a business case, but if it goes to government, it will go through all the select government processes, and I can assure you, I know that the government won't be forking out money if they don't see there's an advantage. And I don't see this as being a political thing. To me, this is sensible. This is something that's come through many times, so I think we've got to just take our blinkers, and yes, it is a bit of an activist thing, but it's come through the right channels, through a notice of motion through council, and I think there's been some good arguments, so I think it would be really good to see this go through as a unanimous decision. So if you're listening, unanimous decision. So, Mr Mayor, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just briefly by right of reply, I would certainly endorse your call for a unanimous approach on this, and obviously there's been a couple gaps in communication that have cropped up and that have given our mayor some discomfort from that. And look, sometimes grassroots sort of campaigns don't always get all the columns perfectly into all the channels or even know what all the channels are. That's one of the challenges that we have with our interface with the public, and it certainly wouldn't be the first time that somebody didn't understand how many doors there were in a council that needed to be opened and in what sequence was preferred. I do feel as well I need to pick up a little bit around this sort of question of whether it's political or not. One of the advantages of living in a democracy is that politics is done in the open, in conversations like these, where decisions are made every day. And I think it's actually quite constructive that we acknowledge that politics is our job. We need to do it well, we need to do it constructively, transparently, etc. But to use that sort of language in a way to seek to discredit something strikes me as particularly difficult to accept in this sort of space where literally, if you ask somebody on the street, what's your job? They would say, politics. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. We now go to vote. And that is carried 15 votes for and 2 against. So we're now going to break for morning tea, so we'll be back on the dot of 11. Okay, I have a quorum, so we're starting. And we're now moving on to item number 8, which is the Health and Safety and Wellbeing Report, and that's going to be presented by Alan Downs, and Patrick is going to attend as well as Wayne is away. So I will hand it over to you, gentlemen, when you're ready. And that is on page 65.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll take the report as read, but there's a couple of things I'd like to highlight first. One is the Deloitte's recommendations regarding the change program that we've been looking at. It will come before the council at a future date. And also a question that was raised at the last meeting regarding the wellness table, regarding a people feedback survey and the percentages of people involved in the survey. The 2020 survey is 76%, and the 2021 survey was 46%. Over to you.
Thank you, Alan. Right, are we open for questions, councillors? I have no one in the queue, so is your buttons working, or have you... I thought that might be the case, that you're a little bit slow after morning tea. Okay, first up is Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, and thanks for the report. Just looking at the 21% turnover on page 72, which obviously is quite a concern. Do we have exit surveys that can give us information about what the main reasons are for people leaving?
Yep, I think I answer this question every quarter. We offer all of our exits an opportunity to complete a survey. That survey is administered by a third party to try and improve participation rates and make sure that people can be as free and frank as they can. The most often cited reason for leaving is around a perceived lack of professional development growth, which has been the catalyst for us introducing some development programs last June, which are running at this time.
Yes, thank you. I think I recall you bringing that up before. Now, are there other aspects that come through other than the professional development, and is that reported to us at any point?
No, that's an operational report, so that's reported to management at different levels. So at unit level and at the executive team would look at that. There are other themes. One of the themes. This is pretty normal in any business. It's very rarely that people change jobs for less money. So there definitely is an aspect of people finding that the tools and the experience we equip them with helps them move on to other positions where they're better remunerated than we are able to in the council.
Okay. And aside from those two, are there any...
Not organisational themes.
Yeah.
So there are themes that are particular to units, and units work on them.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Hapida.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. My first question is regarding the site safety visit by senior managers, and just really the nature of that visit, what was achieved by the visit, and what were the outcomes of the visit?
Yeah, I'll take this on, if that's okay. So we introduced them at the start of the year, and whenever we'd come in and both learning from the audit that was complete in 2018, getting some insight from our people, one of the areas where we saw we could quickly demonstrate our commitment to health, safety and well-being is make sure that the executive team were active, present and visible across the organisation. So of course, executive team members take a lead role within their units, but we wanted to make sure that our focus on health, safety and well-being goes beyond simply what are you doing in your unit. I think we were scheduled to complete 10 in a yearly basis. That has been disrupted by COVID. I think we will complete 8 in this calendar year. And the main intention is to allow the executive first-hand insight to hear from our people that complete the work around what they see the risks as being, about how well they see the risks are managed, and for us to take some insight around what we think we could do differently. So following on from those visits, and those visits were accompanied by our health, safety and wellbeing team, there's a number of action items that are then followed up with so as we can close the loop, particularly on the kind of quick wins.
So have you uncovered anything from those site visits that you wouldn't normally uncover?
It's certainly provided much more clarity to us as an executive, as you can appreciate. When, as ridiculous as I might look in my hard hat and boots at the side of a road by an excavation, it gives me a real appreciation for what it's like for the person in the trench, for how important it is for them to have access to tools that actually keep them safe in the job, for me to hear from them around how they think the system works and whether their voice is heard. So absolutely, it's not that it provides different insight, it's that it gives us a greater appreciation for the risks that people face and how we can better improve the system to keep them safe.
So is there a list that we can see of the actions that are coming out of these visits?
I mean, again, I would say there's lists and lists of tactical changes that we do. I wouldn't have thought that was, I mean, it is definitely operational in nature. I really look forward to, as Alan said, bringing back to this committee our proposed health, safety and wellbeing change programme to give you our recommendations on what we need to work on first, the support and the resources that we need to keep our people safe, well and thriving at PNCC, and of course for you to be able to hold us to account on have we achieved what we set out to achieve.
Okay, one other question then. On turnover, under other, what is the nature of the other under 2 people?
So typically speaking, and I will clarify this, if we can make a note, I'll clarify this with Wayne afterwards. Employee initiated is obviously an individual's decided to leave. Other includes a range of things, but most commonly where there's our position might have been disestablished or there's no alternative role for a person.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks for the report. Couple of questions. The first one is on page 71. Under the people feedback survey. Can you just remind me those figures that you've got there, is that a score out of 5, where 5 is feel 100% safe? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And we're doing those surveys yearly, are we?
We've kept the questions that link to those 2 answers, we are repeating at least yearly. But we have changed some of the non-health and safety questions. Okay, all right, thank you. And then in terms of the annual leave, which has crept up, it says in the report, mainly due to COVID, are people not having the opportunity to take their annual leave because of work pressure? Is that what's happening? I would say there's 2 primary drivers. One is in COVID, you know, as beautiful as New Zealand is, a lot of people don't want to use the leave balances to go on trips within this country, and that's definitely a factor. But I think there is another factor around when we've got the degree of vacancies that we have, of people feeling, maybe even feeling concerned that if they go on leave, the work will be there for them when they come back. It's something that management is actively involved in having those discussions. Again, managers get, I think it's monthly information on what leave balances are like, and there is an expectation that managers have a leave action plan in place for those that have entitlements above what they're actually entitled, you know, above what their employment contract allows them to have.
So is there a sort of a goal for annual leave that you're working to? I mean, where would you like it to be?
I would like annual leave to be within the policy. So the policy allows for 2 years to be accrued, and I would like none of our people to have more than 2 years worth of leave.
Okay. So that's been managed at a manager level, yep. Is it? Yeah. Okay. And in terms of...
through you, Madam Chair, with organisational visibility. So every month the executive team looks at what are we like across the organisation and where do we have particular areas of concern.
Okay. And so if someone is working in an area that's perpetually short-staffed, what can you do to make sure that the people in that team are able to get their annual leave? Are you looking at bringing in temps, or because I feel concerned if people are not able to take their annual leave because there's a work shortage, a staff shortage.
Yeah, and again, through you, Madam Chair, I really appreciate your concern, and I echo that concern. We, like a broken record, the executive team continue to repeat that we are not prepared for our people to be the collateral damage that comes from the challenges we have with vacancies, and that there are a range of options that our managers use on a daily and weekly basis, including augmenting with temps where we can, using consultants and contractors where we can, and, dare I say it, reducing the work that we do.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Denison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Patrick. Alan, just in regards to the vacancies or the staff turnover, can I get an understanding where we sit now? Because I know we had a bit of recruitment and now we've lost another 35. Can I understand overall how many vacancies do we have in the organisation?
Through you, Madam Chair, so I'll just provide 2 data points. In this period, so obviously this is the first quarter of the year, you can see from the turnover that we lost 35 in total. In the same period, we appointed 56 people into roles. So we did start the year, as you'll remember, a bit of a hangover from last year with our cost management. We did start the year with more vacancies than we've started in previous years. I think at the peak, we had approximately 150. We continue to have people leave the organisation. We're having more people join the organisation, and as of last week, we had 117 vacancies, but I think there was 20 people that had been appointed but haven't yet started. Obviously, there's notice periods for people.
Thank you. Cheers.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Patrick. This is kind of a COVID-related question with a sort of health and safety lens across it. I was interested, just recently I read the Auckland Council is out consulting on a policy that would see requirements around vaccination for elected members and for staff, and just wondered, is there consideration here that you could comment on, or what sort of context would you put around those considerations of taking that approach locally?
So, Madam Chair, I won't comment on what Auckland Council's doing, obviously, but I will comment that management's priority through COVID has always been to use all the tools we can to keep our people safe and those that we serve safe. So there's no change, if you like, in terms of the direction or the theme. We are actively engaged within the sector to understand what guidance we can receive from the sector. We are actively reviewing, using tools that were released last month. We are actively reviewing the health and safety assessments by role that people undertake to see where the vaccine is a control against the risk that's posed versus where PPE may be posed. To give you context, this isn't particularly unusual. Our colleagues that work in wastewater treatment plant, we require vaccinations for them from hepatitis and other things. So we're definitely, as we speak, we are updating the health and safety assessments at a role level. We are seeking to understand, whilst of course ensuring compliance with privacy law, we're seeking to understand what proportion of our organisation is vaccinated, and we wait with bated breath for the government tool that they say they'll release, I think, in mid-December, to clarify where organisations have the tool of a mandate versus where they don't have the tool of a mandate. So I would say in summary, we're well connected across the sector. Auckland Council is obviously in a very different position to us given the prevalence of Delta in Auckland, and they simply have decided that to explore an organisational mandate and are consulting with their people and those that are impacted in good faith when they do so.
Thanks. I mean, that's given me some context. So you know, we sort of have the advantage that COVID isn't yet here in numbers relative to Auckland, and some might see that as an opportunity to get in front of some things. So to be clear, are we considering a policy approach?
So through you, Madam Chair, we are considering all of the tools that are available, that are legally available at our disposal, to make sure that we can keep our people and those that we serve safe within the legislative framework that we have. I don't want to comment on whether we are actively considering a mandate for some or all at this stage.
Right, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for a very comprehensive report. My questions relate to page 78 of the report, where there are 2 incidents of failure to follow statements of practice or working guidelines, both of which potentially are high potential errors. So my question to you is following up or reinforcing findings enough when these sorts of incidents happen? Does there need to be some more formal process if contractors or staff aren't following the processes that have been designed to keep them and members of the public safe?
I'll have a first go, Madam Chair. So first of all, there is a formal process. Investigation into the incident is part of the formal process. When there are conclusions of the investigation that might suggest another formal process, such as disciplinary, would be required, then we would flow into that. One of the pieces of insight that we had from the recent work on our health, safety and wellbeing strategy is the perception of that fear has on people reporting incidents and people engaging holistically in our investigation process. And so I would say that should an investigation find negligence that was such that there should be further action taken, I have no doubt that it would be taken. What we are actively doing is trying to change the lens through which our people engage in health and safety, try and ensure people can engage openly and honestly about what happened and what didn't happen, not without fear of reprisal, because again, where there are serious feelings, we will take them to task, but we want to work. Our people have the most to gain and lose by not following our processes and our practices. Not me sitting here, I'm not in the trench, right? It's our people that have the most to lose, and the approach that we are taking in our formal processes is to try and solicit as much genuine engagement with them.
My question really wasn't around encouraging reporting or engagement. It's more around making sure that people appreciate that things that are set out to keep them safe, particularly working at height and gravity kills people, those things really need to be followed, and I'm suggesting to you or questioning your level of tolerance around staff members and particularly contractors who choose, knowing that those standards are in place and knowing the importance of them, choose not to follow them.
Sorry to interrupt you. Sarah,
So all I was going to respond to that is we routinely, as you would expect, where we identify a person that has followed a practice that they shouldn't have followed and it was deliberately negligent, that's one pathway. Where we are concerned that the person does not know what they should do, we routinely stand people down from tasks until they are retrained and can demonstrate that they have the knowledge and the competence before they're fit to carry out their roles again. I think that our Chief Infrastructure Officer, Madam Chair, might like to comment.
thank you. Sarah, you may speak.
Through the chair. No mics here. I'm guessing that was deliberate. Through the chair, particularly for our contracts, one of the reasons that we use the standard construction form of contract, the New Zealand standard 391, add your own number, is because that has sanctions such as immediately requiring contractors to stop work if we see unsafe practice. So there are those sorts of sanctions actually built into our contracts, and we do use those sanctions. The case that you've got there, the report of the contractor working unsafely at height came in quite a bit later, but if that had happened and been reported on the day, we would have been able to go to the site and say, stop work. It's called a stop work notice. So we do actually have those controls. And part of the work that we did following on from that one was to say to people, report things straight away. If you see something that concerns you, don't wait to find out if it's as a lay person something to worry about. Report it straight away and let the technical people work out if it's an issue. So that was a follow on from that one. But we do have good, strong contractual sanctions.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Patrick and Alan. Just a follow-up question, and I think Councillor Johnson asked a question just around annual leave. Annual leave accrual for Palmerston City Council, is that a 2-year policy rule? You're allowed to accrue 2 years' worth of annual leave before.
That's the current contractual entitlement that our people have.
Is that a high threshold?
There are a number of benefits to it. Certainly what people that have been here much longer than me share very freely is that people enjoy having the ability to accrue a significant amount of leave to allow them to travel further than Dunedin. And historically that's what people have done, and it's again anecdotally people tell me that's been a really powerful retention lever that we have. In response to Councillor Johnson's question, our first priority is to make sure, in terms of, I'm thinking on horizons here, the first horizon is to try and get our leave liability down to the existing policy levels, and we are actively reviewing that policy with our people.
So what percentage of staff would actually have an accrual level higher than 2 years' worth of annual leave?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I don't have that information, but I am happy to follow up with you afterwards.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
I have no further questions, so thank you, Patrick and Alan. You may step down. I'm happy to move the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Naylor. Is there anyone in the queue who wish to comment? Mr. Armstrong.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of comments. Firstly, I think in terms of the reporting, I've seen in the short period of time that I've been coming to these meetings a significant improvement, which I'm grateful for. In terms of incentives, I've always been of the view that incentives really, really matter, and as an organisation, I think we should have a zero tolerance for people working with us or members of the public being hurt. And I appreciate the comments around having an atmosphere and an environment which is conducive to people coming forward and reporting. But I think at times incentives really, really matter, and where for very, very basic but highly critical issues like working at height, we see particularly contractors or any of our staff members failing to observe or follow those processes, then we should have zero tolerance for that. And it should be clear in the organisation that that's the case. So, whilst I'm very comfortable with the way these reports are coming together in the discussion, I'm just throwing it out there that it's not creating an environment of fear, holding people to account for their actions. It's actually putting a marker in the ground and making it clear around what our expectations are. So that would be my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. There were some really pleasing trends in this report, particularly around the reduction in lost time, number of days. And if you look at the trend from 2019, there's a significant improvement. And also in reduction in lost time injuries, again, significantly improved, along with increased reporting of hazards and incidents. So I think that that is a very pleasing picture of improvement in health and safety overall, and I'm very happy with that. There are some areas of concern for me, particularly around annual leave accrual and turnover, and very little movement in the survey values around safety from physical harm and safety from bullying and harassment. And I think that probably some of this does feed into the vacancy level, where staff are working under pressure because of being short-staffed. We've had a couple of years of stress from the pandemic, and these are things that, these indicators that we see in the report, I think indicate a wider picture of overall staff well-being, being under pressure at the moment. So I would like to hear, maybe in the next report, some specifics of how some of those issues are being addressed, and also some, if we need to change what we do in terms of providing staff benefits or supports, then, I think we would expect those recommendations to come to this committee. So just leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks very much for the report. My comments are around the COVID situation and the traffic light system that's coming and going to hit us like a brick in the next week. I think as an employer of a large workforce, I think we need to get on the front foot. As an employer of 25 people, I'm fully aware of what is happening, and I think developing a policy for your workforce and then going out to your team and basically going through that process is what we should be doing for our team, because of the legislation that's going in this week from our government. So I think we should be on the front foot of this. COVID's coming into our environment rapidly, and we should be going out there and doing that. So that's just my advice as a little wee employer talking to a big employer.
Thank you. Right, there's no further speakers in the queue, so we will now go to vote. And that is carried unanimously. And now move on to item number 9, which is the Waka Kotahi New Zealand Transport Agency funding, and that's on page 79, and we have Sandra King presenting. So Sandra, over to you.
Good morning, councillors. I'm hoping to bring you a good newspaper. I'll take it as read, but I really want to highlight the significant investment that we've received here. 85% of our low-cost, low-risk program, that's projects under $2 million, are bundled up in a business case, a simplified business case, which we've got approval from Waka Kotahi, and all of our maintenance operations renewal budget that we asked for last year has been approved as well. So, some councils around the country have not been so successful, and a lot of that success is down to, the work by officers to ensure the strategic alignment with the GPS and the council's strategic direction, and the work of Pinity with Waka Kotahi, and one of the first steps out of that, which is what they call PTSIP, which is the Palmerster North Transport System Improvement Plan. So a lot of that work has enabled approval of the projects that we got through this programme of works. We did lose some time, as with the rest of the country. We lost a quarter of our year in waiting for this information, so we've been madly packaging works up and getting them out so we can get it delivered. We are lucky with our road maintenance contractor that we don't have to procure us through a separate process for a lot of this work, so we can get some of this stuff just rolling, which is good. What I have tried to do is highlight there are 4 programs that weren't approved in the low cost, low risk, and tried to give you some options around that and some direction from you as to how you want to proceed. But overall, with the number of projects that were approved, I think we've been very, very lucky. There's a number of larger capital programs that are still requiring business case work, and we're working now with Waka Kotahi on moving some of those through and what we need to do. Staff are working with, officers are working with collaboratively. We meet weekly actually with them to work through what we need to do. And I guess, you'll see 2 programs that weren't approved by the agency, the urban bus terminal redevelopment, and also part of the Pinity work, which is the enabling streets for people. Probably the choice of wording needs to change given our Streets for People program. There might be a bit of confusion, but this is about the city itself and thresholding things down. So we're still talking with Waka Kotahi on how we can package that up for the next round of funding, or if indeed funding becomes free in the end of the 3-year package we have. We also know that our networks are under pressure. We've been doing quite a bit of work to unpack the network need versus the costs, the construction costs and the budgets that we have, and working with staff over the next month to really unpack that and figure out what we're going to need going forward in terms of our next annual budget cycle. And you'll see in there, we've asked for a request to move some renewal money into OPEX to do some heavy maintenance work. It's actually a really good strategy to deal with what we've got in Summerhill, for example. Each renewal project we have needs a cost-benefit analysis and an separate approval through Waka Kotahi, which takes time and investigation. So we've played around with the money and what we can do this year, and we think that this is a way forward to actually alleviate some of that work. And I'm happy to take questions, which I'm sure there will be some.
Thank you, Sandra. Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Sandra, for your paper. My question is, I guess, the next 4 to 5 years is going to be quite different from the previous 10 years in terms of, I guess, inflationary pressure and cost pressure. So while historically we've been dealing with inflation of, between 0 and 2%, we've now got significantly greater cost pressure. So really my question is around the funding envelope is based on a view on costs over a period of time, and my suspicion is that that cost base is going to be very materially different, substantially so perhaps relative to previous funding rounds. So that has implications around funding the difference. I imagine it requires a process to manage through. It potentially has implications on the council's balance sheet. So I'm just interested in how the management team are going to manage and work their way through the next several years, given the uncertainties. But if you were a betting person, you'd bet that costs are going to be significantly more than what they were originally envisaged.
We have, in the last 6 months, watching cost escalations change daily in terms of material and construction cost prices across. So when we look at these budgets, we do this in December 2020, and based on what we know at the time in history. So we're in a very, very tricky situation right now. You're absolutely correct. What we do have is some very good information on our networks now, and the last that we've gathered through our contractor, and we have an understanding of what the costs are at the moment. We're kind of having to crystal ball gaze what they might be in terms of supply chain. Even getting product in terms of a sump, which you could just go down to the local yard and get, it's very tricky to procure that sort of stuff. So we're working Sarah might want to jump in here about what we're doing in this space, but we're looking very strategically about how we can procure and look forward in terms of what we need to do with our budgets to manage the networks.
Sarah, I'll pass across to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yeah, I think we've talked about this at previous meetings. We are looking at much more strategic procurement, procuring things ourselves rather than through contractors so we can get orders in early. We're looking at 8-month delays for some materials at the moment. We're also looking at an ongoing shortfall of particularly some of the roading materials that the Manawatu Gorge is going to use. So we're also looking at things like what are alternatives to the materials that we use. There's a raft of work going on to bring. We're lucky, as Sandra says, with the road maintenance contract being live. We've got a delivery route and some fixed prices for most things, which is actually a lot better situation than many councils are in. But just trying to make sure that we can spot particularly stuff that's coming from overseas and procure it early, and actually just change our contractual relationships a bit in that regard.
Does that answer your?
Partially, Madam Chair. I guess managing expectations, being clear on engagement with the funding agency, understanding how shortfalls will be funded against what's been committed, I guess, were within the gambit of my question, as well as the other strategies that we're embarking upon. And I'm not sure that that was answered. I don't know if the CFO wants to comment.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And if there's an easy answer, I think you would have got it already. The reality is nobody quite knows what the next 4 or 5 years hold. However, as you quite rightly point out, the evidence of the last 6 months or so has been pretty telling. So it is probably a case of best endeavours as frequently as possible. We do get advice as a council in terms of our budgeting and planning on forward, I guess, inflation estimates. Yeah, I'm not a crystal ball gazer. I don't know what the future looks like. They're not as high as we're currently experiencing right now, which gives you the impression that that advice is assuming that this is transitory in terms of inflation, and I don't know the answer to that. But it is really a case of, I guess, collectively working with the best information at the point in time in terms of how we deal with that. And in some cases, it may be that we need to prioritise projects over others.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Sandra. So my question's around the unfunded infill street lighting programme on page 88. So what you've said in the report is that if we don't approve additional capital borrowing, that instead of 4 years, the length of time doubles. So do you mean if we didn't put additional funding, it would go to 8 years?
Correct.
So are we assuming that it's not going to be funded for any of that time? So this funding allocation, is it just for this year?
This funding allocation is for the next 3 years.
For the next 3. Okay, so we can assume then that when there's only 1 year left, that we're probably not going to get it for that either.
Hard to know.
Okay, so the residual that we would have to fund, is that just for 1 year, or is that over the 4 years, the additional capital borrowing?
It would be over the 4 years or the 3 years.
So is it 1.32 million every year?
No, over the 3 years.
Over the 3 years.
Over the 3 years. So we've just kept it to the 3 years because then we go into a next 10-year plan cycle. So it'll be an additional 400,000
a year.
Got that right? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And did we get any indication of why that wasn't co-funded this time? Because we have had co-funding for that programme in the past, haven't we?
It was deemed a low priority in terms of the alignment with the GPS, which was all around safety programs. So it was deemed medium, and they only funded high to very high. So I don't have the detail of that information with me, but I can come back to you on that.
Because if I recall correctly, we did get the co-funding for the change over to LED lighting, and in fact, quite a high percentage of co-funding. So it seems strange that is this due to a change of priorities, or is it just there's a limit on funding?
Both. Limit on funding, but there were 2 programs. One was the change over to LED, which was the 85% co-funded share, and then we had a separate program, which is what this is, to infill, to put streetlights into different locations, which previously under the previous NLTP was funded, but this time around it hasn't been. So.
Okay, all right. Thank you for clarifying that.
Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Sandra. Just on page 80 and number 6, what was the amount that we didn't get funded for the urban bus terminal and the amount for B, for the enabling the streets for people? What were those amounts that didn't get funded?
Good question.
Oh.
I don't have that information.
That's right, you can give it to us later. It's just like, so what will happen with those 2 projects in terms of not getting that funding?
At the moment, under this NLTP, not proceeding, but there is good attention from Wakakotahi staff, particularly here in the region, that they want this pursued. So we're going to be working really closely with them to prepare for the next round, and looking at how we can capitalise on that going forward.
So when's the next round?
Be the next 10-year plan cycle.
Okay, so it means that it puts a halt on our urban bus terminal.
Potentially not in the planning space, because we still have our share in that program, our 49%. So we're looking at whether we can utilise that in terms of a business case approach to get it over the line for the next round.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Sandra. Just two questions. The first, you commented in response to Mr. Armstrong that, we're getting good data now on the state of the network. And just wondered if you could give us sort of a brief perspective, I suppose, on particularly the impact of heavy vehicle traffic on the network and how well the network is coping.
I think you can all see what's happening on the network. The network is in a poor state and does need to be targeted in terms of where we put investment. And going back to your question around maintenance intervention strategies, looking very carefully as to how we target money and where we put it. Roads deteriorate from heavy freight. Cars don't deteriorate the road. The weight of the vehicle does. So.
Thanks. And I suppose then prefacing where we might go in terms of responding to this situation, looking at ways to get heavy traffic more concentrated on roads that are designed for that and less prevalent on roads that are not designed. From a financial impact point of view, I'd see that as a good thing. Would that be likely a good thing?
Is a good thing. It's part of the work that Pinity and the PTSIP work is looking at right now. So how do we navigate our programs to put the freight where they need to go on the road networks?
Thank you. The second question that I had sort of relates to, it's about where Councillor Hoppett was at too, in terms of, there's a number of things that have fallen on the wrong side here in terms of funding. And certainly some of those multi-million-dollar things I can understand sort of the perspective around where those might need to go in terms of business casing, et cetera. But some of these smaller programs, I guess, potentially we have an opportunity today to try to respond to that with a different decision, but would these naturally be cycled back towards an annual budget type consideration? Or if we don't do anything today, do they just disappear into the ether for 3 years?
Just a clarification, are you talking about the programs that haven't been approved?
Yeah, so things like, some of the, of particular interest to me was around the shared path lighting and those sort of things, but there's other cases where, there's sort of a split between approval and things that didn't get that approval. So those few things that didn't, are they just off the table for 3 years, or could those come back into an annual budget, and would you need direction to bring them to an annual budget?
That direction is for you to consider at the council table in terms of where we go with these programs. So we can push these programs forward, you could add more money to these programs to develop them.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks, Sandra. I'm just in following up on Councillor Johnson's question around that infill street lighting. I see in recommendation 4 that we've got an option there in B to choose between B1 or 2. If we were to opt for additional capital borrowing to fund that $1.3 million share, and as you say, that's over 3 years, I'm just wondering how do we need to specify the annual amount that would be approving for this financial year, and also for the following 2 years, how would that work in terms of our annual budget approvals if we were actually approving it now? Because normally my understanding is that each annual budget is approved for that year as a separate issue. So
it's a very good question. I might defer to Stuart to help answer this one.
I think in this example, if you were to select B2, around additional borrowing, then the borrowing for the current year would depend on that decision. So I'm assuming roughly a third. I don't know the exact number, but we would, there'll be an exact number in the annual plan around what we're expecting from NZTA, and so you'll be agreeing today, I guess, to borrow that additional amount of funds. For the next 2 years, there'll be annual plan considerations put forward.
And so if that's the case, do we need to specify that in the recommendation to be clear?
Hannah's saying yes.
Are you able to give us that figure, or someone? Sorry.
You with me? If we look down to section 310, you'll see the split across each of the years. So we'll be able to extract that information out into the recommendations.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay. Councillor Johnson?
I just wanted to indicate, Madam Chair, that I'm happy to move for B2 as the option.
I'm already going to move, but yes, I'm including those. Yep.
Okay, because that's the either-or one.
Yes,
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
I've got a list that I'm going to move, so.
Okay.
And that is included. Are there any other questions before we? Nope, that's good. Right, so we will move to the recommendations. So I'm happy to move 1, 2, 3. I'll come back to 4 in a minute. 5 and 6. And then I'm happy to go back to number 4 and move 4B, 4B2, and C, and D1. Okay, and we'll get those up, so we'll just check that that's all been. We can't get them all in one go, so what I think I'll do is we'll deal with everything but 4 first, and then I'll come back to 4. Mr. Mayor, have you got a question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Did you list number 7?
No, I haven't listed number 7.
Oh, well, I'd like to put number 7 up there as well, and I'll come back. I'll wait to see what you come back with on 4, but I'm happy to support.
And have you got a seconder for number 7?
No, I haven't, but yes, I have now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, are you deliberately not moving 4A? You didn't mention 4A, but
I'm happy
no.
to move it. I'm happy to move it, Madam Chair.
Yep.
You are
yes,
moving
I
4A.
am. Sorry.
Yeah, okay,
yes,
thank you. Yep.
Thank you. I've got crosses and question marks, and sorry, I was. Yes. So we'll do it in sections as we are on the screen. So I'm happy to move 1 to 3, and we've got a seconder, Councillor Naylor. So what I propose to do, because of time, you can comment, but I'm going to go 3-3 because we're closing in on time. So I'm giving you warning that I'm going 3-3. And that's standing order 2.13.3 if anybody wants to check that. So, on 1 to 3, Councillor Johnson, you wish to speak?
Are we only speaking on 1 to 3 at this point?
Yes.
Okay, no, I'm fine then, thank you.
Okay, and I'm happy not to speak on that. So I'm happy to go to vote on that. There's nobody in the queue. We will now take, that's carried unanimously. We will now take 5 and 6 together. And again, Mr Mayor, you wish to speak? Well,
Sorry, just on 4 and 7.
okay, we'll just hold your finger. I'll take you out because you'll confuse me. Councillor Barrett, are you wishing to speak on? Okay, you may go.
Just briefly, look, I do need to note disappointment that Wakatahi, despite a lot of quite clear direction from many parts of their influence network, including central government, cannot see their way yet around an urban bus terminal. It just shocks me that we are in a situation where we have a wind tunnel that most farmers wouldn't even put their cows in, and we expect the city to call that a good facility indefinitely until we can actually get Wakatahi to actually put some decent money into providing a central part of the whole transport system. And I'm just noting frustration at where this has currently landed, and I'm unhappy with Wakatahi for what it's worth.
Thank
Madam
you,
Chair.
Councillor. Noted. Okay, there's no one else in the queue, and I'm not going to speak on that, so we'll move to vote for time. And that is carried unanimously. I'll now move to item number 7. I think that's easier. We'll deal with item number 7. And Mr Mayor, you've moved that, and Councillor Harpeta, would you like to speak now, please?
Yeah, just very quickly, again, we're of time. Councillors, just ask you to support this. I mean, I think we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, excuse the pun. But this is an entrance to the city. It is getting smashed basically by heavy traffic. Whenever the saddle goes down, the Pahetua track is the alternate route, and it's also a route for logging and milk tankers. So it's not uncommon to see multiple trucks in a row going down what is essentially, it's still an entrance to our city, but it wasn't really designed for that amount of heavy traffic. So it needs some urgent maintenance. It's a little bit of porridge as you go through the road at the moment. So please, if we can support this. I know the officers have been looking for some time to find out where we can find the money for this. Again, disappointed that our friends in Wellington don't see it as a priority either, but we'll have to do something about it. We've got no choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to speak, I'm actually going to speak against this, and this is not because I don't want it done. I don't want the money transferred from the sealed pavement renewals. I would rather the officers come back to council with a request for the 500,000 to do the additional work. Sealed pavement renewals are our core business, and even through the 10-year plan, we've put in less money. If we take that money out of there, then it's a domino effect, because you'll be coming back next year with increased costs, and we'll need more money to be put in that. So I think it's time on our core business that we bite the bullet and put the appropriate funds into those budgets and not rob Peter to pay Paul. If we need another 500k, we need to take it from somewhere else, but not from our core maintenance and roading budgets. So that is why I'm not supporting this. I'm not supporting 500,000 to be taken from our sealed pavement renewals. Do you wish to respond to that, Mr Mayor, obviously?
Yeah, I wouldn't normally, but I have to, sorry. Last time I checked, Summerhill Drive had a sealed pavement on it. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, we now go to vote. And that is carried 12 votes for and 5 against. Right, we now go to item number 4. Are we back? We'll just wait till they come up onto the screen. Okay, we're just putting them back onto the screen. Okay, so is everybody clear around this? And there's also D on the next page, so.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, can we change B2 to 431,000 for the 21-22 year?
Stuart's going to speak to that, so
I think that's useful to put 430,000 for the current annual plan. I was asked the question whether we change the recommendation completely to just suggesting the current year. However, I think it's useful as a signal to officers to put the whole program forward to you in future annual budgets. And so I would like to keep the 1.32 million in there, bearing in mind that's not necessarily a decision for the next 2 years right now, but the 431 I think is useful to add as this current year's decision. Does that make sense?
yep. So I'm happy to change that, and so's the seconder. Okay, I'm happy to move these recommendations. The key one around the infill lighting, I'm not happy to take budget out of that. We've had submitters, we've had complaints, and to me it's health and safety, and I mean that's just straightforward. I'm not going to go into details of these because of time, but I'm happy to move those, and I'll let others speak. So, Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, just wanted to say a few words in support of the infill lighting. Members will remember that this programme came about because when we changed over to LED lighting, we had many streets that the level of lighting was not sufficient. It was unsafe, and as a consequence, when we did an audit of all the facilities, it was discovered that the poles were quite far apart in some streets, and as a consequence of changing over to the LED lighting, there were dark patches between the lights. And this programme was put in as a response to that issue, and it has been rolling out, I think over, if I remember rightly, over 7 years. And even that, to my mind, was a long time for some streets to have to wait to get adequate lighting. And I absolutely would not support anything that extended that programme being delivered over a longer period of time. And so for the amount of additional borrowing, I think it's important that we stick to what we promised residents we would do. There's a whole programme of all of the remediation that needs to be done, and I would really like us to stick with that and to fulfil our promise to the residents. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, completely in support. Just wanted to ensure that you were aware of an additional recommendation
Yes,
as well.
I'm dealing with this lot first,
Thank you.
Okay, there's no one else in the queue, so we're going to vote. Oh, sorry, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to support this as well. I think Councillor Johnson's touched on the infill lighting, and totally agree with the comments there. Also, our pathway program, we've got to continue with that. I think it's arguably one of the best bangs for bucks that our residents get, and to pinch a little bit on some of those programs I think would be a little bit short-sighted. But if I can just touch on Tenant Drive, and that is part of the Pinity, which is the Palmerster North Integrated Transport Initiative. It's quite crucial that Tenant Drive is dealt with. 15,000 people either work or live on that side of the river, and it's crucial that that program continues. Again, our colleagues in Wellington I'm gobsmacked that they can't understand the real value of having that program in place. But please, if you could support this, because it actually has a domino effect for a whole lot of other stages further down the track. So please support what's up on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So there's no further people in the queue. I just want to make sure people realise we're voting right through to D. Okay, so we're voting D's just gone up. Okay, we're ready. Yes, go ahead. Okay. He's left. Oh, no, he's back. Councillor McKellard, have you voted? We're right now. So that is carried unanimously. Right, we're now moving on to Councillor Barrett's amendment, which we'll have up on the screen, and that's, sorry, a motion, not amendment, and that's seconded by Councillor Petrinas, that the CE report to P&S Committee within 6 months on process and options, including use of bylaws to establish and enforce heavy vehicle routes in the city's urban transport network. So, Councillor Barrett, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Anne. Briefly, look, it's pretty obvious the roading network's getting beaten up, and a lot of the beating up is unfortunately coming from heavy vehicles that are increasingly using the network at large, including roads that are simply not designed to cope with it, which is why we're seeing all the extra cost coming to us. Acknowledge and appreciate that there are options in some cases to build the network in ways that encourages heavy vehicles onto preferred roads, but you know, that's a very expensive and very long-term way to begin to resolve what's quite an urgent problem. And I'd like to see us considering using some of the other tools in the toolbox, including a bylaw approach that could see us designating heavy vehicle routes and using that to ensure that the heavy traffic is on roads that are designed for heavy traffic, and that neighborhood streets and roads that are not designed for it don't have those impacts. Other councils are doing this to quite good effect, especially councils that have kind of open grids like ours. So I think it's prudent that we explore this, and the recommendation in front of us is to look for a report back that would give us information enabling us to decide whether or not we indeed wanted to exercise more of the powers in the bylaw to designate those routes. So in my view, there's quite real urgency actually around this. The network's kind of crumbling, and we need to look at not just a budgetary response, but also what we can do by way of use of bylaws and any other instruments to get on top of the problem. So to ask your support for this, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. There's no one else in the queue, so there is now. Deputy Mayor.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I thought there might have been others. Just a brief comment. I'm happy to support this recommendation. I think through, particularly through this committee, the reporting over the last couple of years, actually, it's not a new issue, has been around often shuffling deck chairs when it comes to supporting the, I guess, resealing of roads in particular that were not even due for it because they are basically being shredded. The work that's being done in the region with things like the ring road and the focus to actually be really clear about where we want traffic movements to be, I think does need a little bit of teeth. And so there have been other cities that have grappled with this. I know in particular Christchurch has done some work around this space, and so I think that it is time for us to explore all tools around managing this issue, because certainly costs are just going up, and it's not something that we can just continue putting a band-aid over. We've actually got to start to look at other ways to address the issue. So I think exploring options now is a good idea.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. There's no further people in the queue. Mr Murphy, you've got 30 seconds.
Right. I mean, it sort of builds on what Sandra said earlier. Obviously, I think this resolution is highlighting the tension between our long-term plan and the short-term challenges we're facing. I guess the only thing I would say is this will potentially have some resourcing implications in terms of the other bylaw work. We've already got the street racer work that we're having to look at. These things are complicated. They take time. They take energy and resources. So, but as I said, yeah, appreciate the tension between the long-term and short-term challenges. But we are, of course, actively working with Waka Kotahi to try and deliver on the PNITR as best as possible. And the reality is also heavy vehicles need to use the network as it is at the moment and need to access a variety of locations across the city.
Thank you. I just allowed that in case there's any clarification because we hadn't had any officer comment on it. Right, we're now going to vote. Councillor McKellar, can you vote, please? Right, now we need to move quickly on to item number, oh no we're not, we've carried 16 votes to 0, so that's carried unanimously. So we're on to item number 10, page 97, proposed road stopping. Bryce, we're taking this as read. Councillors, any questions? This is an administrative thing only, so there shouldn't be any. Okay, Deputy Mayor's moved it. I'm happy to second it. Shouldn't be any comments. Thank you. Vote. If I felt that proper debate was needed, it would happen. But this is just administrative, so I don't want anybody to think I'm just... Yeah. Right. So please vote now. And that is carried unanimously. We now move on to our committee schedule, page number 107. I'm happy to move the schedule. Have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Harpeta. Are there any questions on the schedule? There are not. We're voting. And that is carried unanimously. So, Councillor Dennison, you're starting at 1, so we've got, so that you'll be starting at 1, so you've got 50 minutes for lunch. And this meeting is closed.